Well, I can certainly see that, being, let's not look at the third party, but looking at Mega, looking at Bizzdesign, Dutch, French. Well, the one thing we can say is that if you take a simple look at employment law, then the protections for employees are pretty similar in terms of, we've got some serious obligations, never mind the fact that a good company always looks to take care of their employees. We know that people say that, but we know that the laws of the countries that they're operating in say, but you don't actually have to. But you're both operating in an environment where actually you've got to be taking it pretty seriously. So there's a lot of similarity there. So I can certainly see that can be less of an issue. I think that having that compelling new vision of the future should be a way of bringing people together. I think only time is going to tell on the issue of performance. Not having worked closely with the Bizzdesign people and being outside of Mega for a long time, I think that one of the things that we'll be watching to see is when I talk about performance, I'm looking at individual performance, not necessarily Look at it from a BPM perspective. There are still many organisations that manage by activity, not outcome. And I think that it'll be interesting to see how, if one becomes more measured by output and outcome rather than activity, how the cultures merge together on that. We can't know at this stage how that's going to be, but I think that for those of us that are looking at that culture, that's another piece of the jigsaw that we're looking at, not just on the outside part of culture, but the inside part of culture, as to how the employees are going to feel and respond to a potential change. Where they may become, and I don't want to be putting words in your mouth, but where they may become more judged by their outcomes than simply saying, but I did all the activities.
Although what I would say on that is, you're absolutely right that it's the outcomes that matter. But what we've seen as we've engaged earlier in the process and also post-transaction is there's a huge appetite and excitement for getting it right together. And when you bring together multiple organizations or whatever, there's always a risk that you get people on different sides and they want to be right, and we really haven't seen that. It's about getting it right together, and really putting the best talent together to get the right outcomes and right results. That's been really exciting, and I have to say hugely heartening through this process that we've seen that happening. And it's worth mentioning, each of these three organizations has real stellar talent in this space. And actually I was talking to an analyst very recently, and their first comment about this merger is, you are bringing together the stellar talent of this industry, and by putting that into the mix and having everyone sparring off each other, great things can come from that.
Yeah, and I think it is true to say, you talked a little bit earlier about the new platform, and there's always the questions that says, well, gee, you introduce a new platform or the concept of a new platform to the market too early, does it stall versus moving forward? But the flip side is that when you have not fully finished such a platform, it's a bit like sketching out a picture. There's still room for other people to come in and add some colour.
Absolutely.
If you had the platform, version 1 was out there, then you do the merger, it's like, well, okay, where do I fit into this? Where do I fit into it? Whereas when you're looking and saying, well, actually, we've got the basic thing fleshed out, but we've still got some gaps and some questions. So I was like, could I contribute here? So there's room to contribute, I guess.
Absolutely. And it's it's really a case of that foundational part being in place for building the best of everything from here. So I think it's very exciting for the teams in each of the organizations to have that opportunity ahead of them, and an exciting vision and an exciting mission to buy into.
So as we start to draw to a close, there's three particular, if you like, burning questions. So we've seen SAP buying LeanIX. Even since we arranged to sit down and have this interview, we see that Celonis and Ardok have decided they're going to do a little bit of dancing together, although we're not quite sure which dance or what the purpose is, because quite frankly, the release was, great, so you've announced a partnership. To do what? With who? Nothing. But nonetheless, a tie-up. So we've got a significant player in Celonis, another niche player in Ardok. So what does this mean? What impact is it going to have on you guys? What impact is it going to have on the market? And how are you going to compete with these major players?
So the first thing to say is, we want to stay concentrated on what we do and what our customers need and how we can create value for our customers. So whatever anyone else does, we're focused on our plan, our strategy, and customers are front and center in that. Clearly, there's a reshaping of the category involved in this, and we believed ahead of this that the category was ripe for a reshaping and changing the narrative and having the resources to really accelerate on changing that narrative, with a fresh vision, fresh approach to create more value for our customers and create value for our investors as well.
So, repositories, one of my pet peeves, if you like. So some years ago when Software AG acquired Alphabet, I was one of the analysts that was out there giving them a really tough time and said, you've got two supposedly complementary products running two totally incompatible repositories and no plans to actually merge them, and to the best of my knowledge they're still running on separate repositories even today. So how are you going to be maintaining any degree of consistency from that getting answers when you've got certainly three repositories, and by what you're suggesting with a new platform, potentially four repositories? I guess as an enterprise, it's going to be doing my head in, because potentially I could have two Bizzdesign solutions with a new platform coming. So I actually, as an end customer, could find myself in a situation of having three incompatible repositories. So if I thought it was bad with Software AG and Aris and Alphabet, then it's going to be doing my head in with Bizzdesign.
So the thing to remember here is each of the three current offerings are market-leading offerings in their own right. And in pretty much every implementation of those three solutions, they're deployed in an IT ecosystem in that customer environment. And there are multiple integrations with adjacent systems that may do things like, IT service management, project portfolio management, business process management, GRC, whatever. So pretty much every implementation of the three products we have in the suite is in an environment where they are integrating with other adjacent platforms and tools. Each of the three offerings has an API or APIs and an integration capability. So if there are scenarios where multiple of the products may be deployed alongside each other, there's a out-of-the-box tools there to integrate them and have a free flow of information wherever it needs to go. Clearly, with a new platform, that provides an evolving, modern, API-first target state to bring everything together. And we think there's going to be very interesting opportunities around that. Again, not going into lots of detail right now, but we're quite comfortable that having a suite of products with a new generation option in there gives customers both options for what they do now, but also a very interesting vision and roadmap for the future.
Okay. So just as a pure aside, something I'll be curious on picking up there, you talked about a suite of tools, you've talked about a platform, you've talked about a broader audience. So I'm going to be interested to see, when this all shakes out, whether you're a suite of tools, a platform for change or whatever, or a solution to someone else. So I'm going to be very curious to see whether Bizzdesign becomes a solution provider, a platform, or just moves from a tool vendor to being a suite of tools. So just as an aside, because they all have very different connotations to me in terms of value to an organization and where buying centers might be. But I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and it depends on your position as a customer and what you need as to which of those we might be in any given situation. But larger organizations have suites of products, portfolios of products. We won't be any different in that respect.
Sure. So I mentioned Software AG earlier, which I hadn't thought about it at the time, but was opportune because obviously one of the other questions and people have already been talking about is the being in the area of both BPM and EA. And I guess Software AG is another great example. It didn't work. Putting the EA and the BPM together just wasn't resonating because they were perceived as different buying centers. So, if they're different buying centers with potentially different use cases, do you really see yourselves addressing both markets? Or do you see the market differently today than that which it was 3-4 years ago, for example?
So it's worth noting both Bizzdesign and Mega both have EA and BPM propositions in the current product set. And we have many customers who implement both of those use cases in our platform. In fact, in many ways, you could say there's a sweet spot of doing both in one platform, one repository. So I don't see that changing. I think we absolutely will be addressing both of those propositions, but from a better together perspective where, there is value that you can leverage from having your enterprise architecture, the structure of the enterprise and how all of those different types of assets fit together, and a more operational view of your business processes and, some of the key day-to-day operational benefits you get from that. So I think, we come from primarily the architecture world as a background, but I think there's very good recognition of the benefits you get from having these two worlds in the same repository where you can then, analyze across all aspects of that. So, are we going to be a pure play BPM vendor? No, we're not.
Yeah, and I think that, what I think you just said there is excellent. There are absolute benefits in having, shall we say, all of the artifacts and all of the information in one central place and used by all. So whether it's process stuff created by a process analyst or whether it's solution architecture created by, there's only one intelligence base. I think where EA vendors have failed in the past, in my experience, is by basically saying, yes, your process analyst and your business analyst, of course they can use my solution, but then present them with a whole complete enterprise architecture tool and then wonder why. Signavio, for example, came in and said, look, we're doing one piece, we do it well, we've applied to a mass audience, and we've not. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how you guys integrate and separate at the same time.
Yes.
So I agree totally with it should be in one central repository, whether that's the process stuff, whether it's the architecture, whether it's the data stuff, whether it's all of it should be in one central intelligence place. However, if I'm a process analyst, I shouldn't have to go and turn off UML diagrams and all. I shouldn't even know about that stuff because I don't need to know. So I'm going to be interesting to see how the future product roadmap does those things. And I guess, in my mind at least, that will define how successful you guys might be in addressing better, shall we say, BPM markets than might have been historically.
And I couldn't agree more about your point of everything coming together in one repository. You know, as you aggregate information across disciplines, the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. And as you add more dimensions, you kind of get exponential benefits from having greater insights from more and more perspectives for more and more stakeholders. So that's absolutely central in our thinking. And to respond to the challenge you pose there about, you know, specializing and separating, but being able to consolidate the information, I go back to that point about the platform without compromise, that, you know, the specialists who need their specialist tools can get the capabilities they need to do their job while bringing everything together in a common data platform to really generate the value from all of this connected information across all of these different use cases and disciplines, and giving the people who need access to those insights the insights they need in the form they need them.
Cool. So, lots of change. You've talked about profitable growth. You've talked about the consolidated organisation is going to be around that 110 million, anywhere between 100 and 120, depending on which currency people want to use. You've talked about Bizzdesign having been growing at 30%, I think it was you mentioned. 30% growth when at 30 million is a completely different proposition to growing at 30% when you're at 120 million. And I don't just mean the simple, of course, 30 million versus 9 million. No, it's all orders of magnitude different. So how are you looking to maintain, or how are you going to maintain that revenue growth, both in terms of the short term with all of the transition and, with the best will in the world, there's still going to be confusion out there. I don't want to say distrust, but wariness, shall we say. No matter what you've said or what I say, there are people going to be very wary of what's going on. So there may be some decisions being lengthened and such like. So how are you going to maintain that kind of growth in the short term and in the longer term? Because that's a lot of growth. If you look at it and say, gee, that would say that next year you're looking to grow by an entire Bizzdesign all over again.
Well, don't forget that each of the three parties involved in this were already growing profitably anyway. And one of the key things we're doing as part of the integration is putting an integration team on that to run the integration activities, so that the day-to-day operations of each of the companies is not distracted by that. So, business as usual, stay laser focused on execution and achieving the results we want to be achieving, while we integrate in parallel, but with a focused team on that integration, so that the leaders and the people who need to be executing day to day can do that undistracted. So we expect to maintain, the same kind of performance that we have seen prior to bringing this together. But of course, the real big opportunity, the big prize, is thinking about, that next phase of growth with the vision to support it, and obviously the product roadmap to support it, which we're accelerating on, given the additional resource we can put behind it now. and the additional product DNA we bring into the mix.
Okay. You're going to forgive me if I'm going to say I still think that growth is an immense challenge in the short term. So accepting your 30% growth for Bizzdesign, accepting that I was wrong that Mega was still growing and not shrinking as I had in mind, I'm going to stand by the fact it wasn't growing at 30%. And I suspect that the third party, while growing, wasn't growing at 30%. So you've now got to either accelerate the growth of Bizzdesign even faster than you've ever done before, or ramp up the other two parties of this from where they were in growth, whatever it was, up to 30%. So I still think that there's a massive level of growth to be coming in the... I'm not suggesting that, because we're not pinning you down on that new platform thing that says, well, hey, there's some new stuff coming which is going to accelerate, but we know that we don't know when that platform's coming. And we know that, sadly, it's a market where can be a 6 to 9 month lead time from prospect to deal that says, okay, well, the next 12 months is going to prove quite interesting. And I guess it leads almost to the question that says, great that Maine's backing. And of course we should say, and we haven't done, if we want to get an idea of how serious Maine is, we've got to remember that before Maine invested in Bizzdesign, they had already invested in GB Tech.
Yes, correct.
And chose to divest GB Tech and invest further in Bizzdesign. So, without us on the outside knowing all the detail, just at the very outside, okay, well, they must have seen something there that was worth going for. But it also begs the question is, they must have an expectation in terms of how much runway or leeway they're willing to give you guys before they start looking absolutely for an investment, for a return on that investment.
So I have to say Bain have been absolutely great partners over the past couple of years. And we've evaluated literally hundreds of opportunities for different M&A transactions, and we maintain our financial discipline and our focus on execution. And it's great to have the backing of Maine and the confidence of Maine to be supporting us in these transactions. I'm not going into details of business plans and strategy around how we are, managing the financials of the business, but fair to say, we'll continue on that profitable growth path. And, the rule of 40 of, revenue growth plus EBITDA margin is a key yardstick and a perspective that many investors, look at software companies with. Again, I'm not making any specific statements, but there's definitely a level of performance that we expect to maintain and continue going forward.
Nick, really appreciate you taking the time and sharing those insights. I mean, I think the thing's really, really exciting. I think that, the industry's bumbled along for so many years. Well, since before you even started in the industry, people were saying there was no industry, it's all dead. People have been saying this industry is dead since the day it started. And yet still it is going on. Still there are vendors out there, however large or small, whether they're lifestyle businesses pretending they're big or not, doesn't matter. They're out there generating revenue and they're paying someone salaries and they're creating employment. So it can't be failing.
Just look at the world we live in today. You've got faster technological innovation, you've got geopolitical conflict, you've got environmental and social and regulatory concerns. None of that is slowing down. And large enterprises, governments have to deal with this on a daily basis. And, the rate of new technologies coming available, AI, generative AI, we haven't even spoken about that much today, means that imperative to transform and transform faster and more effectively isn't going away. In fact, it's growing in importance. Hence why we're seeing, larger tech players looking for a more architecture-enabled go-to-market and see it as a key capability that they need to be building. So, yeah, it's a growing space. How big and how fast it's growing is up for debate, and we can have a fun debate about that. But I think it's testament to the world we live in that there is a need for the kind of capabilities and offerings that we're providing.
Yeah, I think, I say it's exciting because it's true to say that it's evolving and morphing. It isn't what it was when it was originally started in 95, 96. And I agree with you totally that, there's a question of how much can one avoid architecture when dealing with ever increasing complexity and the increasing risks from a regulatory point of view of not properly dealing with the consequences and avoiding those things. So I'm going to wish you guys the best of luck. I think it's a really exciting project, and for everyone involved in it, then I think they're going to be in for one heck of a fun ride.
Absolutely, and I think it's only going to get more exciting. But thank you for having me on, and pleasure to talk with you.